I think many Americans will come to realize that despite all the rhetoric by President Trump that he is a man of peace, I mean, President Trump now is re-engaging the United States in the killing fields of the Middle East, and this will have consequences for the United States, not only in the international system, but back at home, because his power base, his social base, does not really want any major military engagement, neither in the Middle East nor anywhere else in the world.
I'm joined today by Fawaz Gergiz, Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics and a Middle East specialist. The first 6-week phase of the ceasefire was supposed to lead to phase 2, but we were in that limbo without an agreement for the next phase. Was anybody expecting this major attack today?
Anyone I know expected phase 2 to survive. It was a common knowledge, an open secret, that the Israeli Prime Minister will never go to phase 2. Why? Phase 2 of the ceasefire would have meant the end of the war. Phase 2 of the ceasefire would have meant the release of all hostages and thousands of Palestinian prisoners. Phase 2 of the ceasefire would have meant Israel would have to end the war, and this could have collapsed. The Israeli Prime Minister coalition would have meant the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's political career. The Americans knew it, the Egyptians knew it, the Qataris knew it. It was really part of what we call diplomatic ambiguity. I call it diplomatic manipulation, because the major players knew that the Israeli Prime Minister would never ever accept the end of the war and the survival of Hamas, either politically or bureaucratically, let alone militarily.
See hundreds dead in Gaza. One resident called it a night of hell. Is there a scenario in which these attacks don't lead to the war resuming in earnest?
The Palestinian Health Authority in Gaza, 400 Palestinians have been killed over the past few hours and 500 injured. So it's a catastrophe. The question is not really whether the attacks will continue. The question is, will Israel basically launch a ground attack, another attack, or will Israel use war of attrition, air power, and also using starvation as a weapon of war? Since the beginning of the month, no aid whatsoever enters the Gaza Strip, and Israel decided to cut electricity, to Gaza. So Gaza now lives in the darkness. There is no food, no medicine, no humanitarian aid. And what Israel is banking on, that basically starvation and air power could basically force Hamas to surrender, to basically not only release the Israeli hostages, but accept either exile or leaving Gaza for good.
We've also seen Israel striking Syria and Lebanon. What can we read into this escalation on multiple fronts now?
Israel has made it very clear. Israel now is pursuing what we call offensive deterrence. It's striking Syria, it's striking Lebanon, it's striking the West Bank, it's striking Gaza, it's also striking sometimes the Houthis in Yemen. This is an offensive strategy, taking really security in its own hands. I mean, there's a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, supposedly a ceasefire that ended Israel's war in Lebanon. Yet Israel launches attacks on Lebanon almost every day. And Israel has not really left 5 major strategic hills in Lebanon. In Syria, Israel now controls about 1% of Syrian territories. It has destroyed the strategic capabilities of the Syrian army and continues to attack Syrian territories. So this is really a new era. It's a highly risky strategy because Israel is overextended, and Israel basically is trying to really have a free hand, a security free hand at the expense of its neighbors, and with the green light from the Trump administration. And the reality is, how long can Israel maintain this offensive strategy, and what will be the costs and the consequences for Israel in the midterm and the long term as well?
American President Donald Trump said the start of this ceasefire was a personal victory for him. How does this failure to keep peace reflect on him, especially when the US media is reporting he was consulted by Israel before these attacks and as you say, gave a green light?
Netanyahu would not have launched another major campaign, military campaign in Gaza without a green light from the Trump administration. I think both the United States and Israel coordinate strategically and tactically. In fact, the United States Israel has full support of the United States. And in the past few days, the Trump administration has opened a new front in Yemen. Again, it's pursuing an offensive deterrent strategy against the Houthis. It wants to destroy the military and leadership capabilities of the Houthis and sends a strong message to Iran to come to the negotiating table and accept the end of its nuclear program. So the reality is, I think many Americans will come to realize that despite all the rhetoric by President Trump that he is a man of peace, I mean, President Trump now is re-engaging the United States in the killing fields of the Middle East, and this will have consequences for the United States, not only in the international system, but back at home, because his power base, his social base, does not really want any major military engagement, neither in the Middle East nor anywhere else in the world.
In Israel, we see Ben Gvir, the hardliner, back in government. This green light from Trump. Is there now zero restraint on Benjamin Netanyahu?
Will do whatever he wants with impunity. Anything goes. There is no real guards. There are no checks and balances. In particular, because Benjamin Netanyahu has the green light from the Trump administration. Not only has the green light, he has an open, basically, channel of not only resources, but even military hardware. The Trump administration has basically provided almost $4 billion US in arms in the past few days. So he has the green light, he has the arms, he has the ammunition, he has the will, and most importantly, what we need to tell your listeners and your viewers, that this is really all about Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival is at stake. The end of the war in Gaza means the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's political career. So even though Benjamin Netanyahu would like to tell us that he has strategic aims, the most important aim, the overarching aim of Benjamin Netanyahu is political survival. The only way for Benjamin Netanyahu to survive politically is for the war to go on, and the war will go on. This is not about a few weeks or a few months. This is a long, long war. The war in Gaza would last for a decade, almost a decade, in the same way that the American war in Iraq and Afghanistan lasted.
What is the risk that this war reverberates beyond Gaza again and perhaps pulls in others in and out of the region?
But, I mean, let's keep in mind, again, for your listeners and viewers, this is, Ramadan. This is the spiritual month of Muslims worldwide. It's a spiritual month. It's a month of reflection. It's not only about fasting. It's about reflecting about the state of the Ummah, the Muslim global community. And to kill 400 Palestinians in less than 24 hours and injure 500, this would most likely trigger a widespread rage throughout the Arab and Muslim lands. So there is the reality, you're going to see protests worldwide. And I think also what Benjamin does not really take into account is the state of relations between Israel and Egypt. The reality is now, Benjamin Netanyahu is risking the Camp David peace treaty with Egypt, given the fact that Egypt is a major mediator in this particular conflict, not to mention Jordan. So there are major risks for Israel. But Benjamin Netanyahu does not care. He does not care about Egypt. He does not care about Jordan. He does not care about civilian lives. He cares about one audience, and that's Donald Trump, who's sitting in the White House.
One of Donald Trump's big priorities is that deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. As we head into the last 10 nights of Ramadan, everyone's looking to the holy sites. Is that normalization deal even less likely now?
A normalization deal on the table now. Mohammed bin Salman, even though he wants to normalize relations with Israel, he has made it very clear he will never do so unless there is a path to a Palestinian state, unless the war ends in Gaza, unless the Palestinians have self-determination. This is the official position of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. But Benjamin Netanyahu does not really want a Palestinian state. I have not heard any Israeli leader who believes in a Palestinian state. President Trump does not believe in a Palestinian state. So the reality is, I don't think the normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel really is basically being discussed or examined. I think what Donald Trump is interested in at this particular moment, not the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. He's interested in the $1 trillion that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has promised to invest in the American economy. Donald Trump is all about massive, big deal, the deals of the centuries. And all he cares about is basically money and economic resources. And I don't think the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Saudi-Israeli normalization deal is a high priority on Donald Trump's agenda.
Back when Hamas attacked Israel, October 7, 2023, that focus on Gaza in the months that followed made many fear that Vladimir Putin might take advantage of the US's attention, the world's attention being on Gaza rather than Ukraine. Is there a danger something similar could happen here?
I don't think so. I think what we are witnessing now is a kind of rapprochement between President Trump and President Putin. The relationship between the United States and Russia is basically warming up. So I doubt it very much. In fact, let me turn your question on its head. What President Putin is trying to do now is to play the mediator role between the United States and Iran, between the United States and the Houthis. And probably he will try to also mediate between Israel and its Arab neighbors. So the reality is, at this particular moment in history, the coming to power of Donald Trump has changed the dynamics, the optics of Russian-American relations, and also the role of Russia, not just in Europe, but in the world as well. There is now quite close coordination between the United States and Russia on Ukraine, on Syria, on Yemen, on Iran, on other issues as well.
How are leaders in the Middle East seeing this return to great power politics, to the idea of spheres of influence? Are they looking for opportunities or just trying to ride out the storm?
That the King of Jordan, King Abdullah II, is anxious. He is terrified. He is concerned about what's happening at home in Jordan. Millions of Jordanians basically feel for their Palestinian counterparts in the West Bank and Gaza. That King Abdullah is extremely anxious about the likelihood that Israel basically wants to displace people from the West Bank, the occupied West Bank and Gaza. I think the Egyptian president is terrified. He's very anxious about Israel's basically design to displace the Palestinians in Gaza and trigger a major crisis, not only in Israel-Egyptian relations, but a major crisis within Egypt itself. Other Arab leaders basically don't really like what to see because the pressure, the popular pressure, the bottom-up pressure is overwhelming. And they realize that they cannot rely on the White House. They cannot really, there are no adults out there. Because Donald Trump, even though, Biden fully supported Israel, but Biden established certain limits. There were certain, basically, checks and balances when it came to humanitarian support. Now, you have really no checks, no limits on what Israel can do and will do in the next few days and next few weeks.
Professor Fawaz Gergiz, thank you so much for your time today.